Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, David.
Let's start with some historical background on Kashmir. And something very significant happens in Kashmiri history in 1846. What is that?
Well, 1846 was a momentous, time for Kashmir because it was at the end of the Second Anglo-Sikh War, and after which the Sikhs were, defeated, and they had a Dogra chieftain who sided with the British. And at the end of the war, as a prize, they sold Kashmir to him for 7.5 million pounds, a few sheep and some shawls. And this infamous sale deed not only included the land or territory of Kashmir, but also the people of Kashmir, from whom, over the next 100 years till 1947, the Dogra rulers continued to extract all the money that they had paid the British.
This, of course, is during the British Raj when India is controlling what is now Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, in India, and Pakistan. So, what is the composition of Kashmir at this time? Is it majority Muslim?
Yes, it's primarily Muslim. More than 75%, population of Kashmir was Muslim, and at that time, it was all cobbled together. The Ladakh was conquered by the Dogras in 1843, Kashmir in 1846. Then many more expeditions took place through which Gilgit-Baltistan and other regions that now compose the Jammu Kashmir and the Pakistani side of Kashmir. It came to a conclusion in 1846 finally, but Muslims were the majority.
And who are the Dogras? Is this a caste? Is it a community?
Well, Dogras were they used to live in the Dogra region. They were a sub-clan of, Sikhs, but also had a distinct identity. They were the British pronounced as the British did to many other, communities across India. They called them a ruling caste, the Kshatriyas. So by pronouncing them Kshatriyas, they gave them a right to rule over this region. So yes, they were a distinct ethnic, community speaking a Dogri language, distinct from Kashmir.
And they didn't resist the British Raj, they were collaborating with it.
They were definitely part of it, and I just want to mention one thing that, the although the British controlled a lot major chunks of the subcontinent, but Kashmir's history with the British was very unique because the Dogras were more or less independent. You know, apart from they were not paying any dues to the British. They were, although in the early part of the 20th century they handed a region called Gilgit to the British because at that time there was a great game going on, with Soviet Union and Britain.
Russia.
Yes, in fact it was Soviet Union in the early parts of the 20th century, 1920s and stuff. So they were like jockeying for position there. So the Dogra Maharaja gave this piece of land to the British.
Now, this, as things play out in 1947, is very, very significant because of the whole issue of accession. But before we get to 1947 and partition and the conflict that erupts in Kashmir, you have some interesting information about class and labor issues and that predate partition.
Well, before 1947 or after 1846, in fact, the Dogra rulers, at a they continued to dispossess the Muslim sort of landed class of their land, and a new landed class began emerging who were primarily either Kashmiri Hindus or Hindus who were brought in from Punjab by the Maharajas. And but obviously they were before that they were Muslims were largely the landless peasantry, and which continued and apace after the early parts of the 20th century, where a majority of Muslims continued to remain landless, and land continued to be held by Punjabi Hindus or the local Kashmiri Hindus. And There were also other instances like the education among the Kashmiri Muslims was very low. I mean, there was a census in 1901 when around 1% of Kashmiri Muslims were educated, and that too in religious education, compared to 60% Kashmiri Hindus. So Kashmiri Hindus were part of the state administration, revenue administration. Um, the I mean, by 1920s, there were distinctly two classes. One was this immense mass of Kashmiri Muslims, landless or largely as artisans who were, taxed by the Maharaja a lot. And there was this, administrative class of Hindus. So, this was the time when the first eruptions of class struggle took place in Kashmir in the early 1920s.
And that occurs in the silk weaving industry, right?
Yes. Silk factory was in fact in Srinagar one of the largest employers in the state, and it was the biggest revenue earners for the Dogra administration. And a large number of urban Srinagar people and the rural peasantry were employed in this industry. But the wages were low, the price there was a grain crisis which almost took the nature of a famine, in Srinagar and other towns, which led to massive protests by the workers.
And what year was that in?
1924.
And coming up to 1931, what happens?
1931 is deeply connected to the struggles on equal opportunities, especially in terms of education and jobs. By early 1920s, some Kashmiri Muslim youth had begun to get educated, through initiatives largely led by the religious sort of scholars in Kashmir. But a new sort of youth emerged who went out to Punjab or Aligarh, which were at that time quite major centers of education in South Asia, and they came back and demanded sort of equal opportunity with the Hindu, subjects and citizens. But by 1931, there was a major crisis because, during that these protests for equal opportunities, a man called Abdul Qadir, who was not a Kashmiri but from Punjab, a Muslim, he gave speeches against the rulers, which were immediately deemed as seditious. And a date was fixed for his trial on July 13, 1931. And on that day, police fired on protesters, leading to deaths of like dozens of people. And it became a major event which really shook up the political scene in Kashmir.
It was around this time also that the great Urdu poet Muhammad Iqbal wrote a poem about Kashmir, that it was once known as Little Iran because it was so well developed culturally, and they had all of these arts and crafts and the like. And now it was oppressed and repressed, and that's I think a fairly well-known poem to a lot of Kashmiris. So what's happening in Kashmir during the freedom struggle? During the 1930s, during the 1940s, Gandhi declares the Quit India movement in 1942. The demand for Pakistan is raised by the Muslim League under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And what are Kashmiris doing here? They're watching, they're participating.
Well, Kashmiri struggle, which was led first by Muslim Conference, Jammu Kashmir Muslim Conference, and later on it divided into National Conference and Muslim Conference. They were both watching from the sidelines. The struggles were not against the colonial rule per se, but primarily directed against the Dogra Maharaja. There were few demands. One was for self-rule and full citizenship. It was for equal opportunities. Both the Muslim Conference and National Conference, till late in the 1940s, demanded an independent Kashmir where either Maharaja could continue to remain in a constitutional monarchical setup, or Kashmiris could become an independent state. And in fact, in 1944 National Conference, which is right now, a collaborative sort of an organization, supporting the occupation in Kashmir. At that time, they came up with a document called the New Kashmir document, which clearly had the elements for a future Kashmir independent, where citizenship could be granted to everybody irrespective of caste, religion, or gender. And it was very progressive, because it called for redistribution of land. It called for a revocation of all sorts of debts under which the Muslim or in general the Muslim peasantry were suffering at that time.
So is it fair to say, in terms of economic structure, that the largely Muslim population of Kashmir was locked into a retrograde feudal system?
Yes, I think that it continued to be, even till late. And it was primarily the Kashmiri Muslims. They were not demanding, this question is often asked, that it's a kind of a communal struggle. But it was not.
Communal between Hindus and Muslims.
Yes, and sometimes what happens is that the South Asian scholars, they tend to impose upon Kashmir a sort of a subcontinental logic of Hindu-Muslim relations, which are themselves tinged by events of 1947 and later on communal rights in India and Pakistan. So, but in Kashmir this was not the case. Primarily the class lines were really flowing into the communal lines as well. It was the Muslim majority of people who were landless, who were the working class people, who ended up being pitted against not only the Kashmiri Pandits but also the Punjabi Hindus. Against, there is also a complicated history. I just want to make clear that among the Kashmiri Pandits, there were a lot of people, very progressive, who advocated freedom for Kashmir, even obviously after 1947, and many of them were actually demanding that Kashmir for Kashmiris in the early 20s, because they were against Kashmir, Punjabi Hindus coming into Kashmir to take out jobs and stuff.
Pandits being Brahmins, of course, Hindu Brahmins. In 1947, the British leave India. They partition the country August 14th, August 15th. India is born. Pakistan is born in a new form. And at that time, the Hindu Maharaja, Hari Singh, doesn't do anything in terms of aligning the state with either the newly formed Pakistan or with India. Then a series of events occur leading to the invasion of Kashmir by the Indian Army on October 27th. So what happens between mid-August and October 27th that prompted Nehru to send troops into Kashmir?
Well, the British, when they were leaving, the subcontinent, they had told all these princely states, there were more than 500 of them across the subcontinent, that they should either join India or Pakistan. And the criteria was, if your majority of your subjects are Muslims, they will join Pakistan. If they are Hindus, they will join India. But also the second criteria was the contiguity of the borders, if your borders connected with the borders of either state. By 1947, there were three major areas. One was Hyderabad, Junagadh, and Kashmir. These were undecided states.
Muslim majority states.
Well, Hyderabad was a Hindu majority state, but it was ruled by a Muslim.
The Nizam.
Nizam. Yeah. And Junagadh, it was a Hindu majority area, but was ruled by a Muslim. In Kashmir, it was a Muslim majority area ruled by a Hindu. But in Hyderabad's case, the Nizam wanted to remain independent, but India, launched an attack on his state and took over. In Junagadh, India accepted the principle of plebiscite, referendum, where obviously the Hindu majority decided to join, India. In Kashmir case, the events took on a different shape, because by mid-September, early October, there were a lot of rioting going on in Jammu, where the Hindu activists from India, along with Maharaja's troops, launched attacks on the Muslims of Jammu, which led to evacuation of Muslims from that region, and led to demographic change in that region in a major way. But Kashmir was largely, there was no reaction. I mean, it was peaceful. Even Gandhi at that time said that if there is one place in the subcontinent which gives me a ray of hope, that's Kashmir. But there had been already like struggles going on and again against Maharaja. It was his own people who were rebelling, and I mean, these people had kin relationships across the border in Pakistan, and when they heard about what was going on in this region, they launched an attack on the Maharaja's kingdom.
Responding to the massacres, you mean?
Responding to the massacres, and it's very likely that they were instigated as well. There's a lot of Indian writers who say that they were instigated by Pakistan. But nevertheless, Maharaja had signed a standstill agreement with Pakistan. They could do that under the provisions, but India had not accepted the standstill agreement. And
explain the standstill agreement.
it was an agreement where the state ruler could, sign an agreement of like, okay, give us a few months, 3 months, I think it was, till we make a decision. But by October 26th, it wasn't still 3 months were not over. And when the tribal people from Pakistan and also within Kashmir launched the attack, the Maharaja had by that time signed a treaty of accession with India on 3 conditions, which was communication, defense, and I guess it was currency, and which led India in response to send troops to Srinagar to ward off the attack of the tribals. And in the process, it took like 2 years till the ceasefire was established and line of control came into being.
Now, at the time, and this is documented in a book called Kashmir, the Case for Freedom, Nehru, who himself was of Kashmiri Brahmin origin, made a number of statements that Arundhati Roy has collected here, starting in 1947 and going into the 1950s, that say clearly and unambiguously that the Kashmiris have the right to self-determination. There should be a plebiscite. There should be a referendum. It could be supervised by the United Nations. None of that ever happened.
No, of course not. The Kashmiris who were following or who were, the party members of National Conference, they were led by this belief that if you support the accession for a while, then India will conduct a plebiscite and we could become independent, But what happened was India took the case to the UN. India was the one who took the case to the UN, and UN passed a series of resolutions. Some of them are really, really important. Resolution 47, which called for withdrawal of troops by both India and Pakistan, and creating conditions for fair and free plebiscite in Kashmir. Then Resolution 91 is very important too, because it said that no other sort of process, elections, local elections or anything, will determine the end point or the final resolution of the Kashmir question. And by 1953, Nehru had been making a lot of these statements that there will be a plebiscite. But by 1953, the Kashmiri leadership as well, under Sheikh Abdullah, who was definitely not the only popular leader in Kashmir, by the way, which many people like to believe, he was put into prison for almost a decade after that because Nehru backtracked on his promise.
And to bring it up more toward the current period, there's election fraud in the late 1980s, and in 1989 a revolt breaks out in the valley. It's a militant armed resistance to Indian rule. Is it safe to say that it was rigged elections that was the spark, but there were, underneath that were deep-seated animosities and antagonisms toward Indian rule?
Well, the history of elections in Kashmir is riven by these riggings. Like from the start in the early 1950s, most of the elections were rigged in favor of those who supported continuation of Indian rule in Kashmir. And but even before the 1987 election, there were already a number of organizations in Kashmir who were quite popular, and who were really clear about the demand for independence. 1987 definitely provided a spark, but there were also many other international phenomena happening, like the 88, the wall in Berlin, and the withdrawal of Soviets from Afghanistan, and in general there were so many shifts in the world which
The
really
Palestinian Intifada started in 1987.
the Palestinian Intifada, all these international sparks, kind of joined together with this internal spark to, lead a lot of young people to decide, okay, there's no democratic way to, free Kashmir from India.
Prior to that, there wasn't really a history of armed resistance to Indian rule.
No, not at all. There were some incidents where, say a group of a few Kashmiris decided to hijack a plane and whatnot, but none of that was significant. But Kashmiris in general did not have a history of violence or armed resistance till that point.
And the Indian Army is deployed in great numbers to Kashmir to quell the revolt.
Well, by 1990, there were massive protests, late 89, massive protests, like millions of people came out on the streets. And they were brutally crushed by the paramilitary forces, by the police. And by late 1989, again, a few young men came back, went to Azad Kashmir, line of control, across the line of control, got arms from there, came back, and they were instantly popular, because it was seen as a legitimate method now that, okay, armed resistance is the only way to go ahead. And in response to that, India sent in hundreds of thousands of soldiers to Kashmir. But they were already like hundreds of thousands. There were perhaps like 300,000 soldiers, on the border with India and in different places, within Kashmir. But now they fanned out and new troops came in who occupied all the spaces in Kashmir, literally, all the towns and villages, cities.
Isn't the Indian position that Kashmir is crucial to the national security of the state because it is bordering Pakistan and China as well?
Well, I like to inverse the argument, I think that it has become crucial to the national security only because India continues to occupy Kashmir. Many people I speak to in Kashmir, they would say that Kashmir is a bone of contention now, but we have to turn it into a bridge of peace. And it could be a bridge of peace if it was like if both India and Pakistan, or primarily India, left Kashmir to itself.